Oh
Hi, I'm Kristen Tetzi, author of The Age of the Child.
Hi, I'm Isabel, founder and firebrand of the Uprising Spark.
Hi, I'm Lenora. I'm the creator of The Bitchy Bookkeeper, and we are the founding non-mothers of Childfree Girls. Today, our guest is Dann Alexander. Dan is a child-free man, so we're excited to have you on the show. He is also the author of Planned Unparenthood, Creating a Life Without Procreating. So, perfect. That saves Isabel some time in editing. So, let's start off, Dan, with this journey of writing a book about, first of all, being a child-free man. We don't get your perspective too often. So, tell us about your journey and also the reasons for writing a book about this.
The journey is, I had always sort of felt from a young age, it's an honor to be with you all. I'm jumping ahead here. The journey I'd say it began early without really realizing it, because I had always known or felt from the time I was quite young that I was never going to have kids. It was just kind of always there in the back of my mind. Say, I'm not going to do that. Or because even with my friends, and I had a lot of friends growing up, but I still preferred the peace and quiet overall compared to craziness and noise in large groups anyway. So it always was kind of there in the back of my mind. As far as the book goes, I've been trying to come up with something that was workable for a long time to first publish, and it happened on a day after Christmas. It hit me in the middle of a big family gathering with lots of kids running around and noise and craziness. I had loaded up on coffee because somebody got a Keurig machine when they first came out, and my head was spinning. And then it hit me out of nowhere. Oh, I could do a book about this. And I remember running in and telling my wife, I'm going to write a book about this. And her response at the time, I think, was something like, oh, okay. I don't know if she believed it or not. And then I just went back out to where it was quieter in the house in the middle of all this gathering. And a short few weeks later, I found myself outlining it and talking to a colleague of mine in British Columbia who has written some best-selling books. And I just kind of went from there. I had an outline within a week, and then I took the better part of a year to write it. And I wrote the book while I was still living in Northern Ontario. I'm based just outside of Halifax now, Halifax, Nova Scotia. So it's been quite a journey. It took nearly a year to complete and edit, and then I ultimately decided to run it myself and publish it under my own label. I had a lot of agents take a look at it, but a lot of them told me that they were afraid to run with it because it was too controversial a topic.
Oh, that's weird. You would think they would go for something controversial so that they could get, buzz.
That's what I thought as well. I initially thought, okay, this is an original enough idea that somebody would want to run with this. But the dozens of people I had approached they weren't that keen. A lot of them would say, this is a great idea. This is wonderful. It's unique. It's different. But they ultimately, those people were like, but I can't bring this to a publisher because I don't think it'll sell. Ultimately, I think it came down to whether it was saleability. Yeah. I had over time realized, well, that's not going to be the goal of this to begin with. I didn't set out trying to make this a bestseller. The goal was to just get it out there and get it done. Not only to say, okay, I finally got something done in my career, finally published, but here's an important story to tell. And it wasn't really until it was completed that I realized it was the first book to be written from a male perspective about not having kids. There's lots of studies and essays and so forth out there, personal blog posts. But this really is, as it turns out, the first comprehensive look at the choice from a male perspective.
Are there any now? It's been several years since yours came out. Have you found whether there are any books now by men about child-free men? Because I haven't seen any.
I haven't. I'm not aware of any. And it's 2019, and the first published. This was first published in the fall of 2012. And I'm not aware of any. If there are some, then I'm clearly out of the loop on the news front. And I'm so busy with my own stuff that I'm still trying to read books that I bought a year and a half, 2 years ago that aren't related to that subject. So as far as I know, unless someone else can point it out to me, this is still the first one out. This is the only one out there, sorry. But again, I could be wrong.
What would you, so for people who either haven't heard of your book or who haven't bought it yet, probably especially child-free men who think that nobody's talking about child-free men, that it's all about women. What do you cover in your book, and what will they get from it? And what was your goal in writing it? What was important about it to you?
What was important was to tell the story, to say it's okay to make that choice and it's okay for men to talk about it. That was the initial start to finish was going to be this is a choice, let's respect it, let's talk about it. But as I got to outline more, I started crossing over into other topics that may be of interest and that some men and women may want to talk about crossing over into adoption. And especially I wanted to touch on childlessness, people who can't have kids by choice, because I had friends who could not have kids, some who've since adopted. But I wanted to gradually break into other areas just to make it not just a one-sided tale or testament of, hey, here's a decision, and make it all about this. But there's other things that we can talk about. So I did branch into some other areas. And for instance, the difference between child-free and childless. I mean, we've all now seen multiple posts about this out there and probably written a few ourselves. But I go into things about like the cost of raising kids and why that might be a turnoff for guys as well. And have any guys thought about that? I'm sure everybody's thought about that, men and women both. And yet I wanted to touch on adoption, especially because as an option for childless people who can't have kids. I wanted to touch on that a bit from a personal perspective, knowing people who have been through it, and also the notion that somehow there's still, as we all know, this horrendously bigoted attitude that an LGBTQ family can't be proper parents. And I wanted to cross over and touch on that because that's something that hit me a little hard. I was deeply offended at that old notion, and of course, unfortunately, it's still out there. It's still being preached, and I wanted to touch on that a little bit. That it doesn't matter, people can be good parents, and
even if they're straight.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on that because it really, really bothered me that people were in this day and age suggesting that was somehow that was somehow a problem. Because I've met people who have adopted and who's one couple who did conceive and have a child, and now those crazy to think those kids are now in their teens, but their moms are wonderful people, and I wanted to sort of speak for them a little bit. I didn't make it preachy. I wanted to touch on that about adoption being an option for those who cannot have kids.
Have many other child-free men reached out to you after you wrote the book?
Not too many. There were a couple that did through Twitter and Facebook back when I was still on it. And it's interesting. I really like what you're saying. But majority, I'd say 75 to 80% of the audience I've heard from have all been women who said, thank you for telling the story. And this is how my husband or my partner feels. And this is how my boyfriend feels. And, I'm showing this to him to say, hey, you're not alone. It's okay. It's okay to have this discussion.
Because, that's really interesting. The societal pressure on women is, as you know, extremely high because we're born with a uterus and people expect us to use it, basically. But for men, my perception has always been, men can do whatever. They don't feel that pressure. So what do you think about that?
I think the pressure, unfortunately, is still going to be on women. I'd say that pressure is like 99% to 1, women to men. And I think that pressure is always going to be there until more people get educated about the choice. We're seeing it. I had hoped to see more increased awareness in the last, several years since this book has come out. But I think there's improvements, but it's not at the pace that I had hoped it would be. I wanted to contribute to that conversation. And I still, I hope that maybe in another 10 years, we will see more people talking about that. And then that balance could come down where, it's not women that are constantly feeling that pressure. but it's still very constant. I get, even from colleagues, I'll hear about it at least once a month even now. Oh, they're telling me why, okay, I'm getting married soon, or why aren't you having kids? And they have to have the same discussion at every family gathering come Christmas or Thanksgiving. It's the same discussion. They say, when are you going to have kids? That question goes to women. It rarely, if ever, goes to men. And unfortunately, I don't see it changing anytime soon to a level that I had hoped it would in 2019.
Now, you mentioned that you're married. How, obviously, you had that discussion with your wife before you guys got married about not having children. Just curious, in a social setting, does that conversation ever come up with the two of you? And people ask you, do you have kids? When are you having kids? You said the conversation usually goes to the women, which is true, but I was just wondering if there's an example of you both as a couple addressing that as a couple in a social situation.
It's been a long time since that's come up for both of us in a social situation. And more often than not, I tend to be very swift with my reaction. Be like, nope. And then there'll be this long, I'll be trailing off while the conversation is still happening. I'll slowly been walking away. I'll be like, nope. And my spouse is diplomatically carrying on that conversation, speaking for both of us, because she can, in those instances, to be fair, I think she speaks much more articulately than I do, because then I just go into author-writer mode and like, nope, oh God, what am I going to have? But it's happened multiple times. It hasn't happened in quite some time. I can't really recall a clear enough example, like as far as when and where, because most of the time, as I just explained, that's sort of what happens. I do my whole trailing off while I'm saying no, and then I'm still 50 feet down the other side of the room saying no. But I think now, especially, it's been years since the book's come out, and I'm trying to educate and be a bit more patient with people. And I can address it saying, no, that's never been our intention, which is true. It's just never been our intention. We had discussions about this even shortly after, we met. We had always both known it was it was just not something that was in the cards for us.
When you met, was it did it start out immediately romantically? And by that, I just mean like some sort of dating situation, or did you start out as friends? And so it was a lot easier and there was a lot less pressure and you just naturally talked about not wanting kids, or like, how did you come to find somebody else who didn't want kids? Because a lot of people have a hard time with that.
Yeah, we met when I was living in Calgary, Alberta, years ago, and that was in 2002, and we had connected through an online website. And her and her friend were moving out to Calgary, and we connected and just had these really long, deep conversations. So I'm certain it was the first conversation we probably ever had on the phone. Pretty certain it was. So we ended up talking for 4 or 5 hours that first night we spoke. So I'm certain it must have come up, because I was fairly open about it and very, proud of it. I was in my early 20s at the time, and very, I don't want to say militant, but that's the closest I can describe to it. You're like, oh, I'm not having kids, by the way. Kind of putting the guard up right away almost. But we were always on the same page about that. And the day we met that June 1st, and had been June 1st, 2002. We've been together ever since. And that it just was always there. We'd always had the discussion. So it was never an issue. It was never going to be a maybe or what if.
Did you find that, dating before that was difficult? Because most women think they want to have children. So, you're being so straightforward with that.
Sure. Yeah, it was a bit challenging in a sense, but I never felt uncomfortable about approaching it, about approaching the subject. It always would come up. Yeah, I would always maybe find a way to bring it up. Prior to meeting my spouse, I had just come out of a long-term relationship that was just over a year prior to that. And then I met my spouse a few months later. This is her office too. So, but in between, it was not really, I was very upfront about it. And because to me, it was a deal breaker for as long as I've been, been old enough to recognize it. It was always going to be a deal breaker for me.
And this is a question that child-free people hate being asked, but I like to ask it anyway because I'm curious. Well, maybe not why didn't you want kids, but and it sounds like you were what they call an early articulator, so you knew from the time when you were a kid. And I don't know if it was. I read about your how you were treated in school, so I don't know if the teasing about your cowlick was when you decided that I don't ever want to put someone through this, or I don't like this experience. Was that was it?
That was certainly one of the contributing factors, and I appreciate you touching on that. The school atmosphere where I went to school in a rural school off the highway, both elementary and high school. They were next. One was down the hill from the other, and I was tormented and bullied quite, ruthlessly up to eighth grade, and I've been into ninth, I'd say, before I guess a lot of people started to finally grow up, and that was definitely part of it. From a young age, it was like what my parents had to go through in defending me or dealing with the school or having to, come to my aid. And I mean, I had friends, thankfully, who helped me through a lot of it as well. But I thought, my God, how can you put a kid through this? Like, I would not want to be in that position. But there were other factors as well, too. My parents lost their firstborn child. And that was sort of always there in the back of my head, but it was never the front, it was never the front reason why. It was something my dad touched on, though. Before I hadn't given thought to it to many years. And it's something my dad touched on one night, kind of out of nowhere, saying, is it because, your sister only lived to be 4 days? And I was like, well, no, but I didn't really think about it much. But now that you mention it, yeah, that's another good reason. So those were just two of many things. There were many reasons I thought, well, and of course, cost. I thought, my God, the cost. I think of what my parents spent on having to raise us between the stuff we were interested in, the sports and things we were interested in, and then the other things we weren't interested in that they were paying for, of course. And I thought that just adds up over the years. And I'd gone into some research through Statistics Canada, looking at some certain things as to what the cost of raising kids might be, the cost of daycare and so forth. And it just in a way, it horrified me, the idea that, okay, there's this responsibility. And I just didn't think it was something I wanted to have to deal with. But the bullying, and again, to come back to that, I know what parents have gone through. I know what my parents have gone through. And we've now all read some, horrific stories about, parents who've lost their kids to suicide because of bullying. Cyberbullying now, thanks to social media, of course, has made it more, has given bullies a stronger platform to take action outside of, where they might get, outside of authority, I guess, in a lot of ways, without getting police involved. Because it's really, really hard to, if kids are having to deal with fake accounts coming at them and so forth. So, I mean, to me, it's magnified tenfold since I was younger.
I wrote something a while back about how nobody really cares whether men want children. And that's part of the reason I think we don't hear much about child-free men, is because what you want is kind of considered irrelevant, largely. I mean, It's all about whether women want children. And I understand to some degree that makes sense, because we have the uterus and we have to carry it, and we are primarily responsible for most of the work even after it's born. Even if you have a really good partnership, somehow a lot of it falls on the woman. And I blame women partly for that, because they allow themselves to take it on. But there's also, the people I interviewed for this piece said that there's just kind of a disregard for what men want when it comes to family. And I think there is a huge double standard when it comes to that. Like, you'll hear about women, not all the time, but there will be cases where a woman maybe says she can't have kids or isn't interested in kids. And then we find out later, oops, she actually was, and she kind of tricked him into having a baby. And so now some guy who didn't want to be a father is suddenly a father because the woman decided she wanted a kid. And so I just wondered, because we seem to almost think it just doesn't matter if a guy gets tricked into fatherhood the way it matters if a woman gets tricked to. Like, if you hear about a guy poking a hole in a condom, women are horrified. If you hear about a woman, oopsie, not taking the pill anymore, it's like, oh, I mean, it's just not, what men want isn't taken all that seriously, and how they feel about not being a father versus being a father, I don't think is given as much weight as it is when it comes to women being or not being mothers. I just wondered, I guess my question is, A, how you feel about that, and B, what you would say to men who don't want to be who don't want to be parents, and what they should do ideally to ensure that they are not parents, that they don't become parents.
It's a good question. I've got some mixed feelings about that, in the sense that I do think that I don't know, I always see it as it's still a joint responsibility no matter what. And I mean, it can take one person to set up the trick, but it takes two to fall for it in some respects. And people just need to be, I think people need to just be more responsible. But if person has to be up front and then take the necessary precautions, whether man or woman, they have to take the precautions and just be responsible.
It seems like in a relationship, a lot of people, and maybe not in a relationship where you really, really know the person, but it seems like one partner will rely on the other partner. It almost seems like a gender thing. Like men will rely on women to be taking birth control. It's like, well, it's your thing. You're the one who can get pregnant. So if you're taking the pill, we're good. But I don't know that that's the wisest route to take.
No, I can agree with you. I can agree with you there. I still think that the majority of that responsibility is put on women. But men tend to, from the people I've spoken to, men tend to just go with the flow. They tend to just put a lot of, and of course it can cost both people significantly, that they tend to just go with the flow. Whatever's going to make women happy, they tend to just go with the flow. I've experienced that a lot in people I've spoken with. And I think more men especially do need to take some responsibility and be more proactive and responsible. And if that is, they want to make sure they don't have kids, they really need to do everything they possibly can. And no matter what it takes, they need to do more to minimize the risk, because the pressure still is mostly on women. I do think men need to take more responsibility as far as precautionary go. It's not like you can't just always be going with the flow. If it's that much of a concern for you, take the necessary steps, and even if it means resulting in zero intimacy.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't want kids, you have to be the one making sure you don't have them, no matter what. Yeah.
See, Kristen, this is where the abstinence thing is. So I brought up like a few episodes ago.
If it's necessary, I mean, I was married to someone who didn't want to use a condom at one point previously. And so I was like, okay, we're not having sex then. And that was very upsetting to him, but it's, hey, I do not want kids. And that means no.
Well, it's a deal breaker is a deal breaker.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there shouldn't be a compromise. Like if there's something you're that passionate about and you're determined this is not the life path I want to choose, then you take those precautions at all costs.
This is where I agree with mentioning that you don't want kids up front before you even get into a dating relationship. I did a live stream earlier, and someone brought up saying that they feel uncomfortable bringing it up so early in, maybe first date, second date, or potential before the date even happens. And I was like, well, I agree with what you say. If feel that strongly about it, regardless of how uncomfortable you feel, you may as well bring it up now at the beginning, at the introduction, before you become really uncomfortable and you're saddled with a child or, looking at other ways to deal with a pregnancy.
And I think with online dating being as popular as it is now, there's often, as I understand it, of course, I haven't been on those sites in quite a long time, obviously, but my understanding is that a lot of those sites that are active now, I don't know the names of any of them anymore, they'll have a section where someone will check off whether they do or don't want kids. However, some people may be checking yes because they want to just see if it increases their prospects. And at the same time, there are people, and I've heard these stories, who said, well, I don't want kids, but I've had dates tell me that I'm really limiting my choices in potential partners by saying I don't want kids. And I actually disagree with that completely. I think if anything, they're increasing their odds down the road of eventually finding somebody who does share that direction choice in life.
It makes no sense to even leave the door open to anybody who does, like, okay, so you're increasing your potential date pool by not saying you don't want kids, but that date pool is going to be the same number of people otherwise who you'd be weeding out by, you know what I mean? Like, you're going to get people who then want kids, and then you're either just setting yourself and someone else up for absolute devastation, or what a waste of time.
Right, exactly. I mean, it can be viewed as a filter to filter out potential partners, and who may say, "Oh, they want kids." Somebody who really truly is passionate about wanting kids, they see on somebody's profile that they don't want kids. That really should be the sign to, okay, move on.
Yeah.
Swipe up, right, or whatever the hell it is they do.
Well, and also, what is the rush to find somebody? I mean, everybody that I know of starting from high school on who was in a hurry to find somebody and get married by 25 is because they wanted to have kids by a certain age to,
right.
so that they're not changing diapers into their 40s. Now, it's a flip side for some people. Some people push off parenthood until their 40s or 50s because, health has allowed us to do so, and lifestyle and that sort of thing. But, if you don't want to have kids, like, what's then the rush to, like, take your time, let it happen naturally. I mean, this kills the online dating business if we all have that approach, I suppose. Yeah. But, that's my thought. Like, what's the rush? If you're enjoying your life and you can have a few different relationships, it doesn't have to be all at once, but, whatever, because you're not rushing towards something, which I see a lot of people doing. It's like, right. Get married, and then, because we have this timeline, and of course, biologically speaking, some people do.
Some people really want to get to that next family Christmas dinner, Thanksgiving dinner. They want to be able to say they've accomplished something. Some really feel that, and it's unfortunate because they feel that pressure. Part of it may be a genuine, they might feel a sense that there's some sort of void in their life and they want to fill it. But some sense they want to be able to shut up, Uncle Jack and Aunt Jane and say, okay, I do have somebody now, and I may be having kids, so shut up, leave me alone, and go back and have another plate of food. Leave me alone.
And that's a whole lifetime of let's call it responsibility. Yes. So that you could have that 2 minutes at the holiday dinner to say, okay, I did it. Wow. Yeah. That's tragic.
Yeah, I know. I was just thinking that too. I'm like, oh man, just forget the family dinner. Like, go somewhere else.
Yeah, travel. Go to Saint-Tropez.
Yes, I hear it's great. I can't wait. 6 weeks.
Nice.
Well, not yet anyway, but yeah.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people ask the child-free community, who's planning on taking care of you when you get older? And, things like that. And where I'm going with this question or bringing this topic up is, have you and your wife planned, like, do you guys think long-term? I'm not saying like you're sitting there worried. I'm just thinking like planning for retirement, planning for like, okay, am I asking, do you have a will? Do you have paperwork? Things like that. As I think when people are younger and making this decision in your 20s, you're not thinking about later on down the road. Right. Most people in their 30s, 40s, 50s don't even think about that. They think about kind of when it's too late. So I'm just curious, have the two of you done any long-term planning as far as, your later years?
My response, that it's always entertaining to me when people would ask that question, and it's one that hasn't been asked in a while. Who's going to take care of you when you're older? I think that is one question that for myself is getting asked less, and I'm not sure why, or maybe I just haven't been paying attention to it. But my thinking is, I want to be able to take care of myself for as long as possible, and to that effect, I worked my spouse and I both worked very hard to live well and eat very healthy. Both of us, eat plant-based diet. We're very passionate. It's something we're very passionate about. And the idea is to do everything possible to be able to take care of yourself for as long as absolutely possible. And then, when come down the road, if something happens, we're fortunate, of course, living in Canada, that there are systems in place where we can access certain long-term care facilities. And the more of those facilities are going to be built I hope anyway, in the coming decades, given the aging population. But for touching on wills and estates, I can't stress enough, and I hope viewers take note of this, that it's important to get that done now. You might think that, I may not, it costs money. Absolutely it does. Good quality legal advice costs money. But you do not want to have to deal with potential consequences of dying intestate without a will. You just can't. My dad passed away suddenly in December of 2013. And now he had a will and had everything done up. But I spent the better part of the year of 2014 managing his estate on a full-time basis. And that it just took everything out of me. So it really hit home for me, okay, I need to get this done. Especially as someone with, I don't have children, but what can I do? So, but we only took care of it just this year. So he passed away in 2013, it's 2019. I took too long doing it, and I'm pleading with viewers to don't waste time with it. Get that stuff down, even if it's the most basic thing. Go and seek legal counsel and have that done, so you have at least something in place, and that the state, government, the province, whatever, can't make those decisions for you. So for us, where we don't have kids, but we do now have a niece who's a year and a half old. So we're able to, and we put things in. I don't mind sharing. The idea would be to leave some things to her. And if brother-in-law were to have more kids, add them into it. I mean, it's really easy, because at the end of the day, when we're gone, we're not going to care what happens with anything.
See, there you go, Kristen. That's a motivation for you to get going on.
I know. And, Dan, what you just said is when my dad died just about last year, he didn't have a will. And so doing certain things without a will is a lot more complicated. And he has kids, so he had us to do it. But if it weren't us, it would be his siblings and whoever is left to take care of it. If you have any family at all, if you don't have a will, then you can't have an executor of the will. And if you don't have an executor of the will, you don't have someone people will talk to because, you're not the executor. And then to be the executor, you have to pay like some crazy legal fee just to get a little notary or whatever. I mean,
it's, I ended up being executor of my dad's estate. My brother lived out in province. He was living in the Northwest Territories at the time. And even though he was named as a co-executor, he had to, it was easier for him. And he insisted on signing over his role as executor in order for me to be able to easily do things, since I lived in the jurisdiction. But of course, I never did one thing without running it by him first. Of course, we still ended up working together basically to do it all. Mm-hmm. But even you could have a will and you could have all this stuff, you could still end up in litigation. And I almost did end up in litigation, unfortunately, due to other interests who felt they had an interest in his estate. And it was unfortunate. It resulted in ending of several relationships with members of his family. So, but that aside, it's still important, if you don't have kids, to get something done. And if you don't have somebody to leave something to, figure out a cause that you're passionate about. Like for us, I'm using animal rights as an example. Find a nonprofit to leave something to. Even if someone were coming and selling all of your house and your possessions, and they got the sale proceeds, whatever was left. Figure out a way to make sure that you're looked after and your interests are looked after, especially.
This is why I'm pet free, by the way. I'm like, leave me alone. Go.
I understand. This is her. She parks herself to the left of my monitor and will lay there for hours on end while I'm working. And that's how, since she was, a kitten, that's how she's always done things. So I figured she was going to be in here potentially interrupting me, but I've gotten used to it.
Well, in wrapping up this episode, Dan, is there anything you would like to say to the child-free community, to men specifically who maybe are, struggling with potential relationships, all the things that we normally deal with, men or women?
Don't afraid to be you. You don't have to put up a facade. If you truly believe that you are going to live a life, you want to choose the life of not having children, don't feel you have to compromise that for anybody. There's so many people have compromised on. I've heard stories and wrote partly about one in the book that people have made the compromise, thought, okay, maybe one, and then they've lived to regret it.
That's not a compromise. There's no compromising. You either have children or you don't.
Precisely. But I've heard people say, well, I compromised and said one. And it's like, well, I agree with you completely, Christian. That's not a compromise, because then people are regretting it. And I did have that example in the book. Someone who did compromise. Well, they didn't specifically say she had compromised, but she initially was like, no, okay, maybe one. And it was a joint decision her and her ex-husband at the time had made. And she told me privately she regretted it ever since.
Well, that is all for this episode. Thank you very much, Dan, for joining us today. The link below will take you to his book. You can get it on Amazon. And we love hearing from you. Our email is childfreegirls@gmail.com. Of course, you can follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, LinkedIn, TikTok sometimes. Oh, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.
Yes, subscribe to your YouTube channel.
Are you a child-free man, and have you ever lied saying you did want kids because you thought that was going to open up your dating pool?
Or what do you think about someone who on a dating site would lie or would open up their dating pool wider by not specifying that they don't want kids? Like, what do you think about that?